The War of 1812, often dubbed America's Second War of Independence, was a complex and far-reaching conflict between the United States and Great Britain that spanned from 1812 to 1815. Rooted in maritime disputes, westward expansion, and national pride, it reshaped the geopolitical landscape of North America. The seeds of war were sown in the aftermath of the American Revolution. The young United States, eager to assert itself on the global stage, found itself entangled in the Napoleonic Wars raging across Europe. The British Royal Navy, desperate for manpower, routinely impressed American sailors into service, claiming they were British subjects. At the same time, Britain enforced trade restrictions that hindered American commerce. Meanwhile, tensions simmered on the western frontier, where Native American resistance to U.S. expansion was often supported, covertly or overtly, by British forces in Canada. In this volatile environment, the War Hawks, a group of young nationalist congressmen led by Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, pushed for war. On June 18, 1812, President James Madison, under pressure from these hawks and weary of British provocations, asked Congress for a declaration of war. Congress obliged, and the United States plunged into a war that many citizens neither expected nor fully understood. The early American strategy focused on a three-pronged invasion of Canada, assuming that Canadian colonists would welcome liberation from British rule. These assumptions proved disastrously wrong. In July 1812, General William Hull led a poorly organized force into Upper Canada, but quickly retreated to Detroit. Faced with British troops under General Isaac Brock and native warriors led by Shawnee Chief Tecumseh, Hull surrendered without a fight. This humiliating defeat set the tone for many early setbacks. In October, American forces suffered another defeat at the Battle of Queenston Heights. General Brock was killed, becoming a Canadian hero, but the American invasion faltered. In 1813, fortunes began to shift slightly. On Lake Erie, American Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry secured a pivotal naval victory in September, famously declaring, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." This triumph allowed General William Henry Harrison to retake Detroit and defeat British and native forces at the Battle of the Thames, where Tecumseh was killed. His death marked a significant blow to native resistance in the region. At sea, the U.S. Navy, though vastly outnumbered, scored morale-boosting victories. The USS Constitution, nicknamed Old Ironsides, defeated HMS Guerriere in a dramatic battle that showcased American naval prowess. American privateers also harassed British shipping, capturing hundreds of merchant vessels. In the South, the war took a different form. In 1814, General Andrew Jackson led American forces against the Creek Nation, allies of the British, in the Creek War, an internal conflict that became part of the broader war. At the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Jackson's forces decimated the Creek resistance, forcing them to cede vast tracts of land. Meanwhile, 1814 marked a turning point. With Napoleon's defeat in Europe, Britain redirected more resources to the American theater. British forces launched a series of aggressive campaigns along the eastern seaboard. In August, they captured Washington, D.C., and burned key government buildings, including the White House and the Capitol. This was a low point for the United States, symbolizing the vulnerability of the young republic. However, American resolve stiffened. In September, British forces attempted to seize Baltimore but were repelled at Fort McHenry. The sight of the American flag still flying after the bombardment inspired Francis Scott Key to write The Star-Spangled Banner, which later became the national anthem. One of the most decisive and iconic battles occurred after the war had technically ended. On January 8, 1815, General Andrew Jackson's ragtag army of regulars, militia, free black troops, and even pirates repelled a major British assault at the Battle of New Orleans. The Americans inflicted over 2,000 casualties while suffering minimal losses. Unbeknownst to them, the Treaty of Ghent had been signed 2 weeks earlier on December 24, 1814, effectively ending the war with no territorial changes. Although the treaty restored the status quo ante bellum, the psychological impact was profound. The War of 1812 solidified American independence and fostered a sense of national unity. The war also devastated Native American resistance in the Northwest and Southeast, accelerating U.S. territorial expansion. Politically, the war spelled the demise of the Federalist Party, which had opposed the conflict and even flirted with secession at the Hartford Convention. Their perceived disloyalty discredited the party, paving the way for the era of good feelings under President Monroe. Militarily, the war exposed the need for a stronger navy and better infrastructure, lessons that influenced future American policy. For Canada, the war became a crucible of national identity, celebrating the defense of their land against American invasion. British forces, though weary from years of global warfare, managed to defend their North American territories while avoiding major concessions. Native American nations, however, were the greatest losers. Deprived of British support and weakened by military defeat, their hopes of halting U.S. expansion were effectively crushed. The legacy of the War of 1812 is complex and multifaceted. It's remembered in the United States for heroic resistance and key victories, in Canada as a successful defense of sovereignty, and in Britain as a minor theater of a much larger conflict. Yet its true significance lies in the way it shaped the destinies of nations and peoples across North America. Naval warfare during the War of 1812 was not limited to isolated ship duels or coastal skirmishes. It was a defining feature of the conflict and held immense symbolic weight. Though the Royal Navy was the largest and most powerful in the world, American frigates proved surprisingly formidable. The USS Constitution defeated several British ships in single combat, earning the nickname Old Ironsides due to cannonballs bouncing off her strong oak hull. In addition to this, the American ship USS United States captured HMS Macedonian, while the USS Wasp triumphed over HMS Frolic. These victories shocked the British public, who were unaccustomed to losing at sea. On the Great Lakes, both sides engaged in a shipbuilding race, constructing fleets from scratch in remote shipyards. Control of these inland seas was crucial, as they acted as supply lines and invasion routes. American naval dominance on Lake Erie and Lake Champlain helped turn the tide in the Northern Theater, with the Battle of Lake Champlain in 1814 halting a major British invasion from Canada and forcing a retreat at Plattsburgh. African Americans played pivotal roles during the war, both on land and at sea. The U.S. Navy, unlike the Army, accepted free black men, and by the war's end they made up a significant portion of naval crews. In some ships, nearly 1 out of every 5 sailors was African American. These men fought bravely, often facing worse treatment and fewer rights than their white counterparts, but their presence was essential to American naval operations. Some enslaved individuals saw the war as an opportunity for freedom, escaping to British lines where the British, honoring promises from previous conflicts, offered emancipation in exchange for military service. Thousands joined the British colonial Marines, fighting in Southern campaigns, and even participating in the burning of Washington. After the war, many of these former slaves were evacuated by the British to Nova Scotia or the Caribbean, reshaping their destinies. Native American nations found themselves deeply entangled in the war's politics and consequences. Tecumseh's Confederacy, allied with the British, sought to resist American expansion and unify the tribes of the Old Northwest. Their dream of a native buffer state found sympathetic ears among British diplomats, but this goal was sacrificed in the Treaty of Ghent. Despite their sacrifices, native interests were largely abandoned in peace negotiations. Tribes like the Creek in the South, the Shawnee in the Midwest, and the Cherokee faced brutal campaigns and territorial losses. After Tecumseh's death, resistance fragmented, and U.S. settlers poured into previously contested lands with little opposition. This betrayal of native allies marked a devastating turning point, accelerating displacement, broken treaties, and the erosion of indigenous autonomy for generations. Intelligence and espionage also played a surprising role in the conflict. Both sides relied on scouts, couriers, and informants to gain strategic advantages. In occupied territories, civilians sometimes acted as spies, passing information on troop movements or sabotaging supplies. One notable figure was Laura Secord, a Canadian woman who walked 20 miles through enemy lines to warn British forces of an impending American attack, contributing to the British First Nations victory at the Battle of Beaver Dams. Codes and ciphers were used to protect military correspondence, though they were primitive compared to later standards. Despite limited resources, intelligence gathering often determined the outcome of engagements, particularly in regions like the Great Lakes and the Niagara frontier. For civilians, the war brought uncertainty, fear, and economic hardship. In coastal towns, British blockades disrupted trade, leading to shortages of goods and skyrocketing prices. Merchants saw their livelihoods vanish as ports closed and ships were seized. In rural areas, families lived in fear of invasion or conscription. Women stepped into new roles, managing farms, businesses, and local defense. Children often witnessed battles or fled burning towns, their lives shaped by the chaos around them. In cities like Washington and New York, political debates turned fierce, with anti-war protests erupting in Federalist strongholds. Yet even in adversity, American society showed remarkable resilience, organizing militias, collecting supplies, and producing wartime literature and songs that fueled a burgeoning national identity. Politically, the aftermath of the war led to a reshaping of America's diplomatic and military posture. The Monroe Doctrine, declared just a few years later, emerged in part from lessons learned during the conflict, namely, that America must not allow European interference in its hemisphere. The war also marked the rise of new political figures. Andrew Jackson, propelled to fame by New Orleans, would ride his popularity into the White House. The war's conclusion ushered in what became known as the Era of Good Feelings, a time of supposed political unity under the Democratic-Republican Party, though deep divisions still lingered beneath the surface. Internationally, the war served notice that the United States would fight to defend its interests. Though the issues of impressment and neutral rights faded with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the assertion of national sovereignty set a precedent for future American foreign policy.